going to talk about the issues, how we're going to implement them, and how we're going to change them. Hey guys, how are we doing on audience right now? Could we begin asking questions?
You got any comments there?
Well, while Pawn looks at some more comments right now, I'm going to be talking about something I just published today, financial responsibility. I'm going to provide you something of a darker look of what's been happening right now. I filed a report last week with the California College Republicans based on my work at the CRNC. And something that occurred there at our board of directors meeting was discussion of the budget. And I wanted to read you some numbers that upon pulling the IRS paperwork we discovered. One of them, for instance, being that the CRNC is likely over $3 million in debt. Debt that they refused to close. Chandler literally told me at that meeting that he did not want to disclose the debt because it would be damaging to the organization. But this is, what's really damaging is we don't even know what we're paying on interest, what we're paying on principal. We need to remember that the state government, our state organization, is going to have to start compensating for where the national CRNC used to. Because the CRNC might not be around forever, folks. It's really coming to that point where they're on the brink of insolvency, regardless of what they say. So let's look at some of the statistics here. For one, the IRS reported that this year alone, the CRNC brought in or spent approximately $711,000 more than it made. And combined with profit losses from 2017, the CRNC has a total debt of $806,000. That's almost $1 million over the last 2 years. And by the way, 2016 was one of the only profitable years. So don't buy what they're saying when they talk about, oh, Trump's an extremist. People who support Trump don't bring in money. That was the only profitable year. And by the way, presidential elections before that with Romney, he didn't bring in money. There was a net deficit there. So we know that when the CRNC engages with these, rhino-esque Republicans is what they call them, we're not making money. We're not making real change. Progressive change, and what it really is smart policy, value-oriented policy. The voters want to elect people who believe in what they stand for. And while we saw some change in California, that was really just the swinging of the pendulum. And we need to remember that without our values, without sticking to that, we will lose everything. Now, Mr. Frusiakis, do you have some specific questions to ask me?
Yeah, so we have our first question here from our audience for you, and that is Sahil Nanwandi. He wants to ask you, how do we start convincing organizations such as the Lincoln Club to start donating to us?
So the Lincoln Club, for instance, a lot of individual donors already actually donate to us. The Lincoln Club as an institution is focused on the chapters, and I would want to maintain that policy. The reason is it's completely counterintuitive for the state organization to sap funds away from individual chapters. And that's what would happen if we directly took from the Lincoln Club. The Lincoln Club is amazing, right? But they donate a lot to the individual chapters to bring speakers. For instance, at CRUCI, so at my chapter, the Lincoln Club is providing over $2,500 potentially to one of our speakers, Dennis Prager, that's coming in. We see at other schools, Berkeley, UCLA. The Lincoln Club helps out a lot there. These institutions are designed for the chapters. So no, the policies, and if you specifically read my page, nowhere do I mention that I specifically want chapter-oriented institutions pivoting their funding towards the state. The state needs to reach out to individual new donors. We need to have things like fundraisers. We need to have specific events where we can raise capital from individual and new donors. Because at the end of the day, if we sap away money from individual constituencies, we're not helping them. We're only hurting them.
Right, our next question has to be in regards to what are you going to do about the finances of CCR? What's your policy on finances?
So we have a lot of different financial policies we're advocating for. One of them is a tougher one. It's savings. I want to cut the budget and put 10% every year towards a savings account. And upon becoming chair, I would order the finance committee to explore options of investment accounts. Of course, there are specific nuances to this, legal nuances based on CCR's standing, based on our type of filing, our corporate filing. We actually are a corporation, believe it or not, a state committee. But it all depend on that. Now, another thing is passing through the Constitution a responsible, balanced budget amendment. Many of you may not know, but coming into this year, Lisa Danzig, or coming in 2016, Lisa Danzig actually had us at a net debt. And on top of that, she wasn't bringing in revenue. In fact, upon becoming parliamentarian in 2016, I actually, in one of my reports, took a specific note of this. More specifically, that we had only raised about $9,000 in 2015 to 2016 under Chairman Allen's, and we raised over $20,900 this year. We've actually doubled revenue. So if we look at the amount of revenue the state organizations brought in, it's increased. And the reason is because the state organization is also becoming more important. People have it optically in their view. Even if you're totally against a state organization, you can't deny that it's becoming more influential, more powerful, more important than ever before. Do we have another question?
We do, yes. The next question is, how would you plan to solve corruption that is perceived to be within CCR?
So this is a tough one. When we're talking about corruption, it needs to be divided into two different sectors. You have structural corruption, which is a problem with the institutions, and you have petty corruption, problem with the individuals. Petty corruption's easier. As I already outlined in my policy statements on my website, we're specifically going to be tackling this by ordering the Advocate General to not only create anonymous forms where CRs can file, right? Many people say they are intimidated, stuff like that. And then on top of that, I'm going to be establishing a negligence code, because a lot of this corruption is really just incompetency. And how we do that is if you're not showing up to meetings, you're not filing documents, you're not being transparent, then we can move against you and have you removed by the judicial board. That's important because we need a quick and efficient way to protect our organization. This is especially true as many of you want the state organization to grow. And as the state organization grows, the bureaucracy has to adapt. I don't like the bureaucracy any more than most of you. I'm probably one of the furthest right people on the political spectrum that you can get. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, to have a centralized organization requires we have a leader that knows how to be efficient. So simply put, I'm going to put efficient people on committees, and I'm going to fire the ones that are inefficient. You have another question?
All right, so this question is from Andrew Gates.
Oh, very fun. Okay.
So it's, if BOD attendance was low because the event was restructured to allow only one representative per school, why did multiple chapters, including CRUCI, have multiple members attend?
Well, the only reason is because CRUCI has people on the executive board. So for CRUCI, you have me, who's parliamentarian. In fact, I was actually elected presiding officer. You have Ariana, who's the state chairwoman. So the only reason multiple people attended for a structural difference is because multiple people were directly involved. But it had to do with chapters that only had one person involved, the chapter president, that person was in attendance. Now, the BOD has changed in purpose. Before, when the state organization was never really involved directly, it was a party. You would go there primarily to drink. And, you can still do that there. You can still have fun. You can still party. College Republicans, motto is best party on campus. But at the end of the day, especially with such a large budget increasing to compensate for the CRNC, you're seeing tens of thousands of dollars inherent to these institutions. And we need to be serious. We need to have a business-like approach. Because if we don't, we're going to fail. And it's not just our organization on the line. It's not just, a few individual chapters. It's the discourse on campuses. It's the future of this state. I honestly believe we are one of the last chances to change the Overton window. It comes from the youth, from the universities. It does not come from random boomers online, boomer posting. It comes from us giving explicit advocacies and working with each other to maintain a coherent policy.
All right, our next question is from Alex Green. This is more of a two-part question here. So, why are you so focused on revenues if CCR is a political corporation? Shouldn't your goal be awareness and building a support base first, and then to convert about worrying about revenue streams around election time?
Absolutely. And in fact, if you look at the majority of my policy, it talks about politics. The problem is you can't implement any of my plans. Like, for instance, one of our staffers, Robbie Martin, who's specifically working on plans to actually build a wall. So if you go on my website, you can see the wall we want to bring around to other campuses to help you host activism events. All of that requires money. You know what also requires money? Bringing speakers, helping chapters do that. That requires money. all of these advocacies to win campaigns requires money. And a lot of studies show that. To shift the Overton window, we need to do things like walk precincts, protect candidates in special elections. We need to do things like have an active social media presence. All of that requires money. The only reason I responded in those ways, direct to revenue, was because it was relevant to the questions. However, if you want to talk about politics, I'm very happy to do that. In fact, that's my specialty. I was never involved in CCR for fundraising. Next question.
Alrighty, so this question is from Justin Sexton. How do you plan on bringing chapters back who have left the Federation after Ariana was elected if you continue her combative tactics?
So, for one, I'm not Ariana. I'm a separate person. My policies are completely different, and while I agree with her on some things, in fact, I doubt most of you disagree with her stance on the wall, on immigration, on discourse, I am different in the way I want to go about implementing these policies. My ideas, they're very different. But to also go back to that, I would like to dispel this just completely fake news narrative that chapters are leaving. 2 chapters have dechartered. The first one, Fullerton, and the second one, Channel Islands. But nowhere else has there been this mass dechartering that's been so alleged by my opposition. My opposition has also spread the fake news that the state organizations are rescinding charters. In fact, the state organization has rescinded a total of 0 charters. Absolutely 0. So when they tell you this, it's simply an explicit lie they're attempting to pander to you. It's important that we understand the nuances of these policies. While individuals who were on the state board can get in trouble, the individual never translates back to their chapter outside the capacity they played. Chapters are different than individuals.
Our next one's from Michael Curry. How do you plan on bridging the divide that keeps growing within this organization?
So, we have to be honest with ourselves. And I think, as one of the books I'm reading right now, Alexander de Tocqueville talked about this when he spoke in his book about American politics. Factioning is a natural part of democracy. I would unfortunately say, it's kind of a black pill on democracy, but any democratic institution is inherently going to have division. It's going to have a divide. It did under Lisa, it did under Ivy, and in fact, as we actually increase the democratic institutions in CCR, including the judicial board, we have the BOD now playing an active role in setting the budget instead of just being the executive. We have the executive being on committees. We have the committee system establishing a way for chapters to directly be involved. More people have ideas, and as you bring in more ideas to the state organization, you have more conflict. In fact, I would say that conflict is natural. Now, what's not natural is polarization. I plan to bridge polarization within the organization by reaching out individually to each chapters and showing them how they are incentivized to be benefited by the state organization. I would also say my discourse personally to Ariana's is slightly different. I suppose if you have a problem with the things she specifically said, they're worded differently by me. But honestly, I don't believe that's the cause behind polarization. I believe the cause behind polarization, if you want to get big brain political science-y, is because we see a natural effect that when one person consolidates so much power, there's a split-off. That split-off being of a prior institution is naturally going to look divisive because you have people who are prior friends now running against each other. And you see that now, for instance, Matt Renau is eventually going to be announcing, but I'm running against him. I would actually say we're still friends, and we were back then too. But we had a difference in policy, and that divide, that split-off, caused this. The only reason that's happening is because consolidation of power happened. If anything, healthy conflict prevents polarization. If anything, I'm going to allow people to speak their minds, especially at the BOD, chapters will be able to say what they want, and that healthy conflict will prevent polarization.
Our next question is going to be from Sheridan Nolan. Do you think CCR should live stream all of their budget meetings?
Depends. So at BOD, no, because people who are at BOD can directly access it. Those documents actually can already be found online. What you mean by budget meetings is if you mean donors, I'm not going to dox our donors. But if you're talking about being transparent with how we're appropriating funds, absolutely. But I'm not going to attack, the leftists are so firm in attacking our donors. They will actually go to their houses. They will attack them. They will barrage into restaurants and ruin their dinners with their families. I can't do that to the people who are helping contribute to our organization. So no, I'm not going to be doxing our donors, but yes, I will be holding our executive to the fire.
So Dan Stilley, he wants to know why we have a judicial board. He calls it a Supreme Court. He thinks it's pretty silly. What do you say to that?
There's not a single organization, if you read parliamentary procedure, that does not have a committee on discipline. The only difference is that a committee on discipline requires a general deliberative assembly to meet. It is impossible for CCR to have the general deliberative assembly meet as often as necessary to try corruption. So it's a practical use. And on top of that, the separation of powers is inherent to how our constitutional government was founded. So I believe fundamentally that for a democratic institution to thrive, to exist, it requires a check. Prior, and I would like everybody to remember this, the only reason this policy, which I would actually argue was quite extreme, it took a lot of judicial power away from the chair, was historically driven. The example, Lisa Danzig. She kicked out 40 delegates during her election for no reason, absolutely none. And when the deliberative assembly attempted to overturn her order, she brought in the big guns. She started removing people. She was a tyrant. That is the definition of the action she took. They were immoral, and they were against parliamentary procedures, which are important to protecting our rights. The reason we have a judicial board, simply put, is to make sure the executive follows the Constitution and that the members on the executive are held to the flame in practicing ethical activities.
So I've noticed in the comment section, Mr. Andrew Gates and a couple other people have brought up an accusation that I think you should clarify, and they're saying that you've proposed a bill for CRUCI that would make the executive board unable to speak in support of the revived slate. So how would you respond to that accusation?
It has nothing to do with specific slates. At my chapter specifically, all I've asked my executive board to do is not talk about the elections at social functions. In fact, I was not even the one to originally propose this idea. It was our social chair. And guess what? They can't talk about Champion CCR either. The reason is our chapters are more than just about a divisive state election. If all I do is tell individual chapter members, many of which, who are not interested in this divide, constantly bombarding them back and forth between us, you're corrupt, no, you're corrupt, that's what causes people to hate this organization. In no way was I saying, ban, revive CCR. If they want to come to my chapter during general meetings and talk about it in an appropriate and constructive form, they're absolutely welcome to. And we do this every year. I think this is just another example of how, ingenuous my opposition is. They don't want to give other ideas a real opportunity. Their way of convincing people of their policies is by backdoor negotiations and undermining it through bombarding people on social media. If they want to debate me on a stage, I would happily. And in fact, I would take this opportunity to challenge Matt Renow to a policy debate on the issues of CCR. And if it's a logistical issue for you, I will go to the Bay Area and I will debate you live. If you're actually interested in the issues, you would accept that offer. Let's hear the next question.
All right. How would you summarize the Champion platform? What are the main concepts you want people to understand?
And I believe this kind of goes to everything in my life. It's responsibility. Because when you're responsible, when you're acting ethically, you're going to pass effective policy. And responsibility comes in many ways. You have responsible staffers carrying out the day-to-day duties, to responsible higher-up management, creating discourse and instituting policies that everyone can understand, that are universally applicable, but are controversial enough to where they can change this damaging leftist Overton window. I would say, to summarize my platform, that we're acting to bring the state organization into a responsible, professional environment. That is my goal.
All right. So, what kind of problems or challenges in the organization would you like to address? Like, what do you think really needs to be addressed in CCR?
Oh, the number one, this is kind of the elephant in the room, unprofessional behavior. That will be the first thing I do, is pass a standing code for the executive board on how they act. I'm just going to make this explicit. People have used profanities. They have attacked each other on social media, leaking controversial and inappropriate documents to the general constituencies that mislead them on what's happening in the state organization. What I'm going to be doing is providing a professional way to move forward. Almost all the polarization is a result of people, questionably legally by the way, misrepresenting the organization and attacking constituents in an unjust manner. How I'm going to resolve this is telling them basic things that are already inherent to the codes of debate under Robert's rules. No profanities in debate. Don't attack each other's characteristics. Focus on the issues. And most importantly, keep dirt in the executive board with the executives and bring it to constituents when it actually affects the organization. I'm going to put it simply for you. I don't want to hear about your dating drama. I don't want you to go on anonymous forums and complain, he's dating her, things like that. In a normal corporation, in any business, I would fire you on the spot for that sort of behavior. And because CCR's democratic institutions, which I support, prevent us from doing that, we need to have a codified manner to tackle these issues so we're not continuously being gossip girl 24/7.
Ben Gerber would like to know who will be in charge of determining what, quote, unprofessional means.
Perfect. So the judicial board will, and that's an extensive process in how they're nominated. In fact, my opponent, Matt Renau, has gone live and defended the process. The process, very simply put, is similar to how the United States does it. The president nominates a justice, and the RVCs then approve them. And lots of justices have been denied, in fact. And we have a thorough conflict of interest code for justices who should not be on cases. So unless you don't believe as well, in the United States, the Supreme Court is a valid institution, I believe it's perfectly reasonable for any just society to have an impartial committee determining what constitutes an ethical violation. The executive board, however, should have no place in determining that. The founders of our country cast doubt on these ideas of a majoritarian lynch mob going about and determining what constitutes justice. Impartial justices that don't have term limits are vital to maintaining a just and transparent system.
All right, so Leslie Garcia wants some clarification on a suit that she says that you have filed against Maddie and Sarah. She wants you to elaborate upon that.
As Mr. Vitelli has already stated, unfortunately there's a motion on the floor in parliamentary procedure we call executive session not to talk about the specific policy about it. I can't bring up the evidence, just as Sarah and Maddie should not be leaking their evidence until the case is done. But I will tell you about this. It's an issue about corruption. As I brought up before, there's been a ton of unethical and unprofessional activity. Corruption can be petty, but the reason it's impactful is you have people going on to these random forums and posting this unnecessary drama, just like with the Trump administration, where people are randomly leaking, meaningless drama. They're going to the media. They're saying, well, Donald Trump today ate a steak with ketchup or something like that. Something ridiculous. And these little things over time build up. They destroy the legitimacy of institutions. They create petty conflict. They destroy meaningful relationships because now you're attacking people for personal preferences and beliefs. Because these institutions need to remain legitimate. They need to have some sort of ethical discourse. When you leak information to the media, when you go onto social media platforms, you slander people, that is unethical activity. And don't even believe me. Believe our democratic institution. The board of directors, in fact, my opposition authored the bill that banned illegal doxing. They were the ones who prohibited, as the bylaws state, discourse that has happened in private conversations from being leaked on social media. The simple reason is, for instance, in my finance committee, I don't want you going around and leaking our donors. Or, for instance, on the judicial board, I don't want specific justices going around and slandering people in cases that are explicitly private. That's why these codes matter. And I actually, to be fair, I instructed my delegate, who at the time was Oscar, to vote no on the provision, and he did. Ariana Rollins, the current chairwoman at that time, also voted no on that provision. It has nothing to do with attacking people's character. It has to do with the rule of law. That case specifically is upholding and protecting the legitimacy of our institutions.
So how do you respond to Andrew Gates' accusation here that, hold on, Chief.
I have a lot on Andrew Gates tonight.
There's a lot of Andrew Gates. He's a big talker. He likes it.
Yeah.
So yeah, hold on, Chief.
Tell.
We all know the judiciary is just an extension of your social clique. How do you respond to that?
The funny thing, Andrew, is if that was true, then I'm curious why other RVCs that are on your side, which, by the way, a lot of this is stupid petty drama that has to do with the fact that you don't want to appoint new justices. For instance, there were Berkeley justices nominated to the courts, but all of them were rejected. 100% of them were rejected. In fact, had the RVCs been cooperative, had the RVCs even done their job, they haven't met for, 6 months now? It took them 4 weeks to publish a judicial question. Had they done their job, which I plan to make them do, none of your accusation would hold merit. I find it unfortunate there are not more justices on the board. And right now, there are nominated justices waiting to be questioned, but it's just being held up in the bureaucratic system that's been appointed by my opponent, Matt Renow. And I would much rather talk about the policy issues. But because the other side, especially you've posted these quite horrendous, by the way, meme pages, completely slandering my character, insinuating I slept with people, which, by the way, you were so adamant about how much you feared the Kavanaugh president coming out and damaging mails across this country that you do it to your opponent. So I would say at the end of the day, the judicial board is about promoting active, reasonable, and effective justices. These people are educated. In fact, I would have loved Berkeley justices to have been nominated. I would love them to be on the courts right now. But that never happened, and I'm really sad to see that's the case.
Capcan Siddiqui is asking you, what would happen to people who leak CCR board, confidential information? What would be the punishment for them?
If you're on the executive board, so if you actually read the bylaws specifically, it talks about anyone on the board of directors who leaks those specific provisions can be suspended from the state organization. Of course, I can't ban you from your chapter. There's a Federalist Clause in the Constitution under the CCR Bill of Rights preventing us from acting on your chapter. But I can prevent you from being on the executive board in the future, and that's the way it should be. If you're acting unethically, simply put, you cannot be allowed to remain on the executive board playing an important role in our democracy and, I would actually say more impactfully on the state because you're bad for the organization. You're unhealthy.
All right, here's a question from a Marius Venture. Kimo, is there any extent of ethical violations or corruption within CCR if discovered? Would that mandate, okay, so essentially they're asking you if there's any corruption within CCR, how would you address that? And what ethical violation penalties would be enforced to ensure that it does not occur again?
So from a technical standpoint, I would love there to be a tier of punishments, and I actually wanted to go into that in the bylaws. Now, currently, Robert's Rules only allows us to mandate by the extremes. There's only 3 things you can do. You can either censure somebody, which is basically just condemn them. It does nothing. Or 2, you can suspend. Or 3, you can expel. There's no middle ground right now specified in the bylaws. And I would like to amend that, to be fair. However, it depends on what the corruption is. If it's structural corruption, so there's a perverse incentive to do bad things in certain institutions, then those institutions need to be dismantled. And I would urge the Constitutional Review Committee to ratify a constitutional amendment for the General Assembly to discuss that would get rid of those institutions or reform them. Now, if it's petty corruption, so somebody's taking bribes, he's dating her and thus giving her a preference or something like that, then we would have the judicial board try them through our current due process. I would like to remind everybody as well, corruption cannot be a witch hunt. Everybody has their due process rights. Even the case now, which my opposition so adamantly uses against me, they're being given their due process rights, which, by the way, they have decisions. They complained they didn't want it in person, for instance. They've complained about that online. Yet they were the ones to ask for it in person. And then on top of that, the individuals, they want electronic communication, and we granted it to them. So we're providing the due process that they need, and it's fair to everybody. So I believe it's 2 things. The first one to solving corruption is to aggressively try it. But the second one is to defend the innocent. And I'm just going to recite Blackstone's formulation right now. It's probably the most famous part of common law. And to put it simply, it would be I'd rather see 10 guilty men go free than 1 innocent man be imprisoned.
Alex Green wants to know, Kimo, can you elaborate on your, quote, ethical violations and your right to determine what is ethical and not, specifically personal choices involving relationships between people and speaking publicly or semi-privately about said relationships?
Well, I have no jurisdiction to determine that. The bylaws would. No individual has a right outside of the text. So I'd ask you to read the bylaws. Now, there are certain ethical commitments you make that are written explicitly into the code. For instance, right now, there only exists a conflict of interest code outside of finances for the judicial board. And the judicial board specifically stipulates that if you are dating somebody, you cannot rule on their case. That's legitimate in my opinion. To put it simply, if I'm in love with somebody, I would never rule against them. And that's why it's important to have these codifications in the bylaws to prevent people from acting unjustly. So, conflicts of interest, for instance. That's always the reason we regulate in this manner. It's never to control people's personal lives. And in no way would I ever want to do that. It's simply to preserve the legitimacy of these establishments, and more importantly, to protect the innocent.
Justin Sexton is asking you, how many deployments are you planning during your tenure as chairman?
Remember that I'm going to be chairman during an off year, so it depends. I'm going to CRP in the upcoming convention. It's this winter. And I'm going to be discussing with them specifically, as a delegate, the strategy we want to take for the upcoming year. And that will decide the appropriations. Now, I do want to do a couple. I know in Orange County, for instance, there's going to be a special election. There's a high probability of us winning that. So I will be doing deployments based on the polling numbers for that. We might do a lot. I already discussed it with some of my great members on my slate. I have the best staff. That will be doing 5 for that special election. That's a very high number. We did 10 in Orange County alone under Panagiotis Frisiakis, his great vice chairmanship, during the general election. And we did even more prior, during the primary elections. So I plan to do lots of deployments. I plan to appropriate a significant amount of money to them. But of course, it depends on polling. There's a lot of nuances to this. So to even give it to you in a more academic-y way, we go through a resolutions committee. We go through that process so everybody has their input before we appropriate funds. Next question, Mr. Frisiakis.
All right. So how would you exactly describe your team and the champion slate as a whole and the individuals that could potentially be on your team? What are your thoughts on that?
So simply put, I'm making sure everybody on my team, A, works together effectively, B, they work for each other. One of us is going to have weaknesses, and another team member is going to have strengths. They're going to be compatible in that working together, they can accomplish something they could never do alone. I'll give you an example. Myself, right? I come off as the academic-y, professor-y guy. I have my glasses, my little coat, and everything like that. And if you read my papers, right, I've published over 500 pages worth of reports and documents and theoretical structures for this organization. But we have practical people to go out and implement those policies. My co-chair right now, she's an amazing person. Hannah Stanford. She turned around the social environment at Cal Poly SLO. By herself, she turned her chapter into the 3rd largest chapter in the state of California. And I'm so proud of her to be my co-chair because she understands the social aspects of this, which is so important. And then on top of that, my executive director, Panagiotis Frisiakis, he's the practical guy. He's the logistics guy. If I need a vendor, he's the one to get it. If I need a hotel, he's the one to get it. Travel plans, he's the one to get it. All of these are effective people doing effective things. And I would say each region, one of my members are tailored to what that region needs. In Orange County, we need somebody who can unite the different organizations. We have YAF organizations, TPUSA organizations, we have CR organizations. And tomorrow, I guess I'm doxing her right now. You know, you can bite me, Paloma, later. But Paloma Chacon, she's going to be running on Champion CCR as our Southern Vice Chair. And she is the one to accomplish these issues. She is the leadership we need. We need to bridge the gaps because there's so many TPUSA, so many YAF, so many CR organizations. She's the one to bring all of us together because a conservative movement needs a uniting leader, and she's the one to do that. Our logistics can be handled by Panagiotis, but as I said, everybody works off each other. We are a team.
All right, so Ben Gerber and a few other people were thinking about how, you've been known for writing these very thorough documents, but a lot of times people have a hard time understanding the legalese of it all. And Ben Gerber was kind of wanting to know if perhaps there could be some kind of an amendment or some kind of a change where you'd be able to produce documents that would be more understandable by the common layman.
Absolutely. So it depends in each different committee structure. In the Judicial Board, I won't be on it soon, so that'll be up to them. What I've done specifically is provide a one-page synopsis while I was on the judicial board. For my other documents, for instance, if you go read the report I documented on the CCR page, I have a one-page highlights, just giving random numbers out, making it easy for people to understand. And that in total makes it so people can see the numbers, see the evidence, and directly decide on how they want to push a policy. So I am going to make it simpler. I'm probably not going to be writing a lot of the reports. Remember, as chairman, I'm the big ideas guy. I give conceptual analysis, and then my staff will. But I will read every one of my staff's documents and make sure they are accessible to the people.
So this is a really important one here. This is one that I've noticed that everybody in the comments section and really everyone in CCR wants to know. And it's, how would you go about addressing drama? And how would you go about stopping drama under your tenure?
So that's a massive question. And the reason is there's different types of drama. You're going to have policy drama, right? We saw that with the platform that was published, which is being worked on to add an extensive due process section along with other specific policy advocacies, research analysis. That had objection to it. But I will say that when it comes to drama about policy, to being a true conservative, I will never back down. That's the sort of drama we tackle head on as an organization. We defend our values. So that's one form of drama. And I think that one will become prevalent as I institute some policies which aren't going to be popular with a lot of people who are basically left-wing Republicans. The second one, of course, personal drama. He hates her, he dated her, she dated him, they had a bad relationship, etc. And it depends where. I will say the state organization has no function to be involved in people's bad relationships, and I think it's really unfortunate that it's become that way. But we've even seen from the state level, in the actual Republican Party, the CRP, you had, for instance, Chad Mays and Christian Owens engaging in adultery, and it impactfully, damaged us at the polls. These corrupt individuals, when they engage in corrupt activities, must be held to the fire. So, if their relationships are acting unethically, if they're giving each other illegal benefits, if they're violating the conflicts of interest codes, then we will act appropriately. But in no way am I going to act on stupid drama. I'm going to ignore it, to put it simply put, because most of this isn't relevant to us. And to be frank, when I give it attention, when I give it a platform, then it becomes relevant. But I will say this. In the past, we've had individuals, for instance, somebody on the other slate, Miss Maddie, she had a massive breakdown on the board live, and then she seized a state chat, deleted everybody from it, and we asked her kindly to put everybody back. We asked her to restore things, we can go back to the way things were. But unfortunately, she didn't want to. She didn't want to cooperate in a just system, and in that case, I have to fire those individuals. So to summarize this for you, first, I'm going to act responsibly. I'm going to understand what's relevant to the organization. But second, when I do need to act, I'm going to act with strength. Because we need strong men. Dark times were created by those too weak to act in times of need. I am the one to be the strong man to act when we need him. So to put it simply, peace through strength.
All right, so there's a few people spamming a certain question, so I think we're going to have to address
Perfect.
it.
I would happily address it.
So we're going to have to address this. It's brought up by James Woolraven.
Oh, very
and,
fun.
As well.
Interesting.
They're wondering exactly what the CRUCI board resolution was last night. And I want you to be able to explain that to everyone and clarify that, because some people are insinuating that it was used to censor people. So
absolutely
why don't you
not.
clear the record on that?
So for one, as I said before, I prefer to keep my executive board details private. But to simply put it, CRUCI has an appropriate place to talk about things, that we not allow discussion of these slates at parties where people just wanted to have fun, to interact. And that's all the resolution did. It's very clear under the CRUCI Constitution, Article 4, Section 5, that the president has the power to represent the organization. While the resolution talked about Champion CCR, in no way was it binding to the executive board. The executive board already had to deal with what was binding under Article 4, Section 5. What it did do is establish a policy of responsible behavior, because I believe every one of my board members should act responsibly. Of course, this doesn't affect general members. General members can talk as they want, but we must be higher because we need to protect the individuals in our club from frivolous, irresponsible behavior arising out of the executive board. And I think it's important that we all act in a way that facilitates this. Of course, if these individuals have problems with the resolution, they should approach me individually on my executive board. But I don't like to waste time on pointless drama that has nothing to do with the state organization. CRUCI is stronger than it's ever been. We have great membership. We have a great social chair. We have a great president, a great vice president. I have the best team I ever have. And by the way, we're going to be hosting Dennis Prager, actually, on February 5th. We're going to be doing these great events to bring conservatives in and make the southern region stronger than it's ever been before. Do you have another question?
This is basically a follow-up of the same kind of question. For some
Very
reason,
fun.
This is very trending. But essentially, it's just a very basic one. It's who wrote that resolution.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, this resolution was written in coordination with a number of people. I'm not going to dox other people on our board because board drama that's at UCI should be contained to UCI. If they have a problem, they can bring it up. What I do feel this has become is a few agitators wish to use this against me to undermine my electorate and my chapter. It's really inappropriate, it's irresponsible behavior, and I'm really disappointed to see it. But ultimately, I did help in the drafting of it. You can tell through the parliamentary language. But if you actually read the legislation, it targets nobody. All it does, and it applies to me too, is that at parties, at social events, we're not specifically going to talk about state drama. That's an easy way to handle it. Ask your board members to act responsibly and consistently.
Okay. What is your plan to expand chapters and expand membership of CCR in the long term?
So there's lots of ways to do this. One way is simply to be an effective organization in what we do. We need to double appropriations when it comes down to regions. We need to provide incentive structures for larger clubs to access the organization better. We have, as I said before, the wall policy. As I said before, we have, specific policy advocacies that deal with activism and chapter by chapter levels. In fact, we're going to be creating legislation actually that we can be pushing as something of a policy level discourse. And on top of that, we have the platform. We have a lot of things. One of the policies actually that I wanted to institute to get us more awareness, because by the way, awareness is one way we get people to join the state org, is a college Republican versus college Democrat debate. And if we have that, we can expose the problems that, are in Democrat policies. For instance, they talk about immigration. Let's talk about that. A Congressional Budgetary Office article found that illegal aliens cost over $100 billion to our institutions annually. They take from the social institutions, the education institutions, the health institutions, and all of those percolate down to local communities, damaging them and sapping resources. That's a clear-cut argument. In fact, actually, if you look earlier at my board, at CRUCI, we posted it on our Facebook page, you can see me at the Politicon convention speaking about that. And I talked at Politicon about why don't you guys address this question of economic appropriations? And the only answer leftists could give me was, reading out over the fact that I used the word illegal alien, which, by the way, is the legal code. So it's completely ridiculous that you're attempting to skew this debate in a way that has no actual meaning, no concrete meaning. So at the end of the day, I'm going to be advocating for good policy. I'm going to be appropriating more raw resources to chapters. I'm going to be increasing activism, making the state message explicit, providing opportunities, because opportunities is going to result in involvement.
All right, here's a question from Alex Laniak. So he wants to ask you do you believe it's responsible and efficient to write rules that micromanage and control how people act? Do you think that those rules work, and do you think that it makes people angry as a result?
No. In fact, I would never... That's actually why I wrote the CCR Constitution for rights. So I specified in that Constitution that the state organization cannot act on chapters. So absolutely not. It's very inefficient to do that. So I'm not sure what that's specifically referencing. If you're referencing the ongoing drama at CRUCI, I would say there's only one agitator involved in that right now. It's not a large issue. My membership doesn't care. My membership wants to have fun. We want to engage in conservative activism. It's really unfortunate we have these single agitators infiltrate the board, cause unnecessary drama, and I will be resolving that because that's my job in leadership. But never would I create these extensive regulations to govern your behavior. And if you read my policy, it has nothing to do with that. My policy, simply put, is to provide resources effectively, to provide staff effectively, and to give a message. The only time I'm going to be involved in staffing behaviors if you're acting honestly, incredibly inappropriately, which in the past, a lot of people have on the other side. For instance, you had Ms. Rowland's prior chief of staff attempt to leak confidential documents dealing with staffers to the general public, which, by the way, is not only a violation of executive session, but it's a violation of the rules of CCR. It'd be like if Trump's chief of staff went and leaked a document about a staffer engaged in inappropriate conduct to the population and said, oh, look how terrible Trump is. He's doing all these things. We should fire him. That's what that sort of behavior promotes. So it's reprehensible. And that's the only time I'm going to act on something. Because I care more about the state organization, I care more about the policy, than I do about people's stupid, petty conflicts.
All right. This next one's from Eric Lendrum. He's wondering, who do you support in the California Republican Party chairman's race, and which one do you think you could work with best as the CCR chair?
Right. So this is a finicky issue. The reason is I'm going to be a delegate to CRP, so I should not be playing my cards too early on that. I've heard, at least right now, I haven't researched all the delegates in full, but Travis Allen has given a very strong advocacy for the youth. So I would, of course, consider Travis Allen to be, I guess, the front runner of the youth right now. I do not know, though, and I cannot endorse anybody at this time, and I will not endorse anybody until the executive board of CCR has, because it would be inappropriate to do so otherwise.
All right, here's a question again from Marius. He's wondering that in the case that the Democrats were to deny your policy for having a debate, what would be your backup? What's your contingency plan to dealing with that?
Right. So for one, we're going to appropriate resources elsewhere then, and that's fine. But for two, we're going to make them look like losers online. We're going to make them look like cowards, chickens, because that's what they are. If they can't even defend their policy in a state which, by the way, is basically completely Democrat now, then that's the true essence of cowardice. And we would make that clear. I would be on Fox News one day talking about that. We would make unnecessary ruffling of the feathers. And then, of course, the political actors would play their little games, and we'd get the policy passed at the end of the day. But I'm certain the college Democrats will not act in this manner, and they'll act in a responsible manner, and actually accept my offer to a debate.
Alrighty, here's a pretty good question. It's from Aethelwolf Augustus. He has a question. What are we going to do to try and counter the cultural and institutional power of the left in California, particularly on university campuses, given that the elections were so poor in results?
That's a great question. One of the ways we're going to do this is by using our legal institutions that we have in Washington. I got a great email from somebody who supports CRUCI the other day, giving us a way to file a petition with the White House, which would specifically outline to the educational department why UCI was violating Title IX statuses. Because Title IX works both ways, right? It says you cannot discriminate. But if you're creating these institutions that only benefit women, only benefit people of a certain characteristic, then you're violating that own statute. Of course, it's through our interpretation of it. So eventually I'd love to see something like that repealed. But in the status quo, we can enforce those laws to prevent those institutions. And that's honestly one of the only ways to see immediate outcomes. At UCI, for instance, the EVP, along with the entire external branch of the student government, poured thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of dollars into the election to support candidates that were not conservative. And they do this in a myriad of ways. They support legislation which is leftist, that they call student advocacy. But in reality, asking for free education, free college tuition, all that's doing is raising taxation. It's just passing the burden on to somebody else. It's, on top of that, creating inefficiencies because colleges no longer have a reason to spend their money appropriately. So we know that tackling these institutions head on, calling them out on what's legal or not, is one way to solve this. And on top of that, when it comes down to the cultural war, we need to be an active voice. We need a platform. A lot of people on the executive committee Solid do not want a platform, and I've heard this discourse multiple times. One person argued that the state organization should not provide a platform to advocate on because it would exclude certain college Republicans. And I agree, we don't have to be like micro-wing every single little policy, and chapters can have their own policies, but the state organization, passed through their democratic institutions, should have actors that go about promoting our values and policies. Because to be quite frank, Republicans generally are pro-life. They're pro the Second Amendment. They're pro the First Amendment. There's no reasons why we can't have explicit policy advocacies on these institutions. And on top of that, the only controversial ones had to do with the funding of LGBTQ communities. And I want to just make it explicit. It is my policy that we should not be funding institutions any more than we should straight institutions. In my opinion, at some point, it seems like this whole gender thing has become almost a religious institution, which would violate the Establishment Clause. So they so thoroughly believe that who they hump for a couple minutes defines their character that they're taking it on as a religion. All they see when you ask them is, how do you identify yourself? Oh, I'm gay. If that's the only way you define yourself, then you have a problem. Your sexuality is not your ideas. Your sexuality is one part of your life that is private. And while you're free to do this, I'm just going to make it explicit. You're not taking my taxpayer dollars. So I'm just going to summarize this real quick. First off, it's attacking the institutions which permit this behavior. And second off, it's providing an alternative to these institutions and a solid, reasonable policy that can act against them and provide a different platform of discourse. I would just like everybody to remember, though, I doubt this is going... The second one especially will have immediate solvency. The electorate's not on our side. But we need to begin to turn that Overton window. Because if we don't, we're in real trouble. Let's get the next question.
So what has inspired you to want to run for chairman in the first place? And what has motivated you to take it upon yourself to be a future leader?
Absolutely. So, for one, I've always been interested in policy. Why do you think day one? Just as a basic staffer, I was writing about structural reform. I wrote in conjunction with other people, the Constitutional Review Report, how I envisioned CCR functioning. I designed the committee system. I helped the chairman organize deployments. I helped people practically implement policy. I helped staff committees. I helped teach those committee members how to write reports. I reformed the BOD. Structural reform is the first step. As chairman, I have the practical duty to implement the new Constitution, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, there will be a totally new Constitution in the upcoming year, which I wrote, and it'll be my job to implement that Constitution in a practical manner. The other reason, of course, I supported my opposition initially. He wasn't much at first, but I said, look, you're my friend, you're a good guy, I like your policies, so I'm going to support you. At that time, I was ready to back off of CCR politics. Not only was I basically seeing the end of my presidency at CRUCI, but I was ready to begin to focus on my future law prospects. And I even recognize now I'm jeopardizing those, because law schools, to put it frank, don't want conservatives. What caused me to change was my oppositions, change in policy. They went from somebody who was virtuous, who had values, to largely not. They promoted people to their state organization against the separation of powers. They promoted people to their slate who didn't agree with basic conservative values that I do. So this really is a values thing for me, and I care about conservative values. Otherwise, I would not be here. To be frank, I'm not being paid for this. I'm a registered parliamentarian and a real estate agent. I could be doing those things, getting money, saving up for a house, paying off my education. I'm here because I care. And yes, some of you might even see that as dogmatic, and I agree with you. It is. Some people, would even say it's idiocy. And a lot of them do. A lot of CRs don't want to be involved for that specific reason. The only reason that I'm advocating in this manner is because I believe it's a virtuous way of living. It's because I have a trust in God. And I phrase this easily. There are 3 important things in life. 3 ways I govern my decisions. The first one is God. The second one is family. And the third one is country. And not even in that criteria is myself. Because at the end of the day, it's not about my ego. It's not about selfishness. It's about being part of something. It's about fulfilling your duty under natural law. And that's why I act in these ways, because they're ethical and they're moral. I shouldn't have to teach you why to act as a good person. And the reason I'm running as chair is because I believe what I'm doing is good. I believe at the end of the day that a lot of the policies of the opposite group are not going to yield good results. They will yield evil. So, to put it frankly, to make that not sound too straw-man-y, Matt, I'm sure you're going to attack me on that later, I'm doing what I'm doing because I believe it's virtuous, and I honestly do believe that. And while I'm happy to have a policy debate with you, I strongly disagree with the results of your policies, and that's why, to be frank, I left your slate. Because initially I had an easy shoe-in job as a staffer, and I was happy. But I left because I believed what you're doing was not virtuous.
Alrighty. The next question is for people that accuse you of just going to basically be another year of Ariana's administration, how would you differentiate your leadership style? How would you differentiate your policy goals from the current administration?
Yeah, I mean, that's easy. So policy goals is the easiest one, right? We're in an off year. We're not in an election year. But that can be expected in any case. So totally different policy goals. I'm not going to be doing tons of deployments. I can't, right? When it comes down to leadership style, which is what I think this question is really about, right, is begging, oh, are you going to be Ariana and be as provocative online? The answer is no, because I have a different conception of ethical standing. I have a different conception of how the organization should function. I'm different than Ariana. But to be fair, I agree with her on some policy issues, and I think most of you do. I agree with her on immigration. I agree with her on the platform. By the way, she voted in favor of the platform. So I agree with her on those things. We don't have to disagree with each other on everything. And I think that's a mistake we often make. For instance, even my opposition. I agree with a lot of them on specific policy issues. When it comes down to taxation, we all agree on less taxes. When it comes down, generally, to voter balloting, we don't like voter or ballot harvesting. When it comes down to specific policy issues on Supreme Court cases, states' rights, we all agree there. So in a lot of cases, I'll agree with Ariana. But in leadership tactics, I'm slightly different. I'm more nuanced. I'd also say my priorities are different. Ariana had a large social media following. My priorities have to deal with specific institutional policies. I want to pass things through CRP. I want to increase revenue. Those are going to be my priorities. And for those of you who know me, I'm just a different person in actions. I function differently. My leadership is different. I prefer doing things in ways we can cooperate with people if at all possible. I just realize, like Ariana even does, that sometimes cooperation is not feasible. To put it simply, I'm always willing to cooperate. I'm always willing to sit down. There's not been one chance, not one time, where I've said no to sitting down to somebody because of their political ideology. And I would even sit down with my opposition and have dinner. I would sit down with anybody. But I'm not going to back down on my values. So I can say, I will hold a strident, a specific, a never-ending position on my values, and I will not compromise on those. But I'm willing to be a reasonable person.
Alrighty. So, mostly people are starting to kind of repeat the same things at this point. So that's kind of what mostly
Got
is
a
happening.
new question?
So another question that we could bring up here is, how would you differentiate kind of champions' policies to perhaps the policies of the opposition that might come up, and what do you really want the voters, the people of CCR, to know from Champion CCR, and why our slate is going to be essentially superior to any other slate?
Well, I can preempt their policies, but obviously I don't know yet, and it would be unfair of me to say, oh, the other slate has all these terrible policies, don't vote for them based on their policy advocacy, because we don't know their policies. If they totally agree with me, then we're unfortunately on a playing field where we have to be like, well, why'd you copy our policy? But when that day comes to differentiate, I absolutely will. But I want people to know that our slate has more than just the advocacies. It has the specific people to go about fulfilling those advocacies. As I said at the starting of my speech, I'm specialized in how to get things done, how to conceptualize, how to have these structural reforms, these long-term ideas. We have Panayotis Prusiakis, the executive director, who has a knowledge of logistics. He's very skilled in that. We have Hannah Stanford, my co-chair. She's exceptional in providing the social atmosphere we need in CCR. We have tons of people that are going to be added to the slate that have an absolutely remarkable vision for the organization. Paloma Chacon, coming from, the southern region, a vision to unite the conservative organizations. So we have experience. That's the first thing. Second off, we have the knowledge of the institutions. Almost all of us have played a significant role in the state organization before, and those who haven't bring in the knowledge of what an outsider sees so we can have these reforms. Understanding how the structure works is important, because if you don't understand how the structures work, you'll never pass one of your policies. You'll get obstructed. Things won't go properly. I'll put it frank, Ariana spent about a year figuring things out. It took us a long time to get together the practicalities, how to contact the comp controller, how to file properly, different budgetary aspects, how to pass legislation, things like that. It's not an easy job. It's a job that requires dedication. It requires your soul. And that's why people are here. My slate is made up of people who are willing to give themselves to virtuous policy. And I think that's an important thing just in life in general. And I'm sure many people on the other slate are as well. I am absolutely, I think at least, I hope that it's undeniable that they have virtuous people. But a lot of them at the end of the day don't have the experience. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have what it takes to run a state organization. But to be fair, upon all of this, I don't know all the details of their other slate. I've heard rumors, so I'm giving a rough approximation based on those, but I'd love to know who's on their slate. And maybe they want to release later. That's totally fine too. I don't think anybody should be coerced to release earlier, later, but these are generalizations. And I would say if I'm running against the slate I think I am, who's mostly made up of deep moderates or people who don't have consistent Republican policy, then yes, I would say they fall into all these faults that I listed. But as I said, we'll see. I'm always willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I do believe that a lot of college Republicans want to do good. Even if we as fallen creatures, as Genesis puts us, are endowed to temptation and evil, I also believe that a lot of people want to do good, especially because people who happen to be conservative also happen to have values of liberty, happen to have values that protect freedoms, and those specific values are things that lead to goodness. So I do believe, to be fair, even though I criticize my opposition, that people in this organization generally tend to be good.
So this is in regards to some hearsay that was traveling around Facebook earlier today. This was probably about in the early afternoon today. It was an accusation that Champion wants to rescind charters or something along those lines. And people are dechartering. What's your response to that?
That's just fake news. I remember hearing that, and some people came and asked me about that. And that's probably the biggest fake news I've ever heard. As I said earlier, 0 chapters have dechartered. 0 chapters will have their charters rescinded. It's a conspiracy theory, in fact. I wonder if any of these people even know how the process to decharter somebody is. And the Judicial Board laid it out specifically in the McNally case. They said to explicitly dissociate, the chapter has to do it. So if a chapter leaves, that's on their own prerogative. But the conspiracy theory that Champion CCR is suddenly behind it all is ridiculous, it's unsubstantiated, and quite frankly, it's dangerous. Furthermore, the state organization has absolutely no way to go about rescinding charters, even if they wanted to. The only way you could is if you prove there was fraudulent intent. And even then, if you read the credentials code, you're not allowed to rescind the charter, you're only allowed to limit delegates. So as long as you're not explicitly frauding your delegate list, nothing's going to happen. And I think people are, quite honestly, not going to. So the rumors that are being spread around, they're heinous, they're questionably ethical, to be honest, and they're immoral.
Here's a really good question from Michael Curry. Assuming the election is not one-sided and you win the chairmanship, how would you work with individuals who ran on an opposing slate?
Honestly, the first thing I would do is break bread. You cannot be friends with somebody if they refuse to break bread with you. I will travel wherever I need to go to break bread with my opposition. I'll have a meal with them. I'll discuss policy. I'll discuss our similarities. Because there's a lot we can work together on. And I'll be frank too, I'm not going to win every seat that I want. And when I don't win those seats, I expect that the other team, the opposition, want to sit down and have a dinner with me so we can discuss how to move forward. And if they're willing to do that, I believe I can work together with anybody. Let me put you some perspective on this before we go on to the next question. I'm also on the executive board for Model United Nations and Speech and Debate. My partner in Speech and Debate is actually an explicit leftist. He's literally the vice president, I believe, on the feminist Illuminati on campus, right? The most left-wing thing you can possibly get. And I'm friends with these people still because it's about being a decent and honest person. I'm willing to sit down and talk to these people. I'm willing for there to be reconciliation. And why? Because it's a virtuous thing to do. The Bible instructs us to do it because forgiveness is one of the most powerful things you can have. If you can't forgive somebody, then you're endowed in hate. Then you're endowed in judgment. Even the worst people can be forgiven. Jesus told us a story, I believe it was in the book of John, about the adulterer that was brought before him from the Jewish authorities. And they told him, through Abrahamic law, you must stone this woman. And Jesus' response to them, after writing in the dust, let the man throw the first stone who has not sinned. That's a powerful quote to me. Of course, I recall what Jesus said at the end when he said, go forth and sin no more. But even from a secular standpoint, this has meaning, because it means that anybody can be forgiven, and as long as we're willing to move together, as long as we're willing to come together at a table and break bread, that anybody can be forgiven. And I believe that, and I hope my opposition does as well.
Our next question is from a righteous college Republican from the state of Arizona. His name is Kenny McLaren. Do you have any plans to work with CR organizations in other states on policy, campaigning, or anything like that?
Absolutely. So at my next Fireside Chat, I'm actually going to be rolling out, it's focused primarily on national policy, what my foreign policy is, right? We've been talking a lot about internal policy, but oftentimes external policy is neglected. And the reason is because in the past, we haven't been directly involved in the CRNC. So I'll give you an example. The first thing I'm going to do in my first 30 days of office is instruct the Finance Committee to draft a piece of legislation that will deal specifically in tackling the budget deficit in the CRNC. And I plan to work, by the way, with other CRs from other states, Arizona being one of them. And I'm going to draft legislation that prevents us from having this terrible deficit spending, irresponsible deficit spending. I'm actually not even opposed in general to the principle of deficit spending, as long as it's done responsibly. And, if you actually read my financial platform, I talk about in CCR, you can have deficit spending like Lisa did. We've never done deficit spending, but she did. In the cases where A, it was absolutely necessary, so to hold a convention and thus elections, or B, as long as it didn't supersede the income we brought in per month on interest. So if the interest is $200 and we're bringing in $400 every month, then it's perfectly fine. In fact, it's a part of a healthy organization to take out capital to expand our operations. What I will do, however, is work with other organizations, especially as we roll towards the 2020 elections, in specifying how we plan to tackle the opposition who wants to steal the presidency. I'll put it plainly for a lot of people. We're not going to win California. We're not. It's just a fact of life. But we can deploy to other states to win those swing elections. So I'll absolutely work with them. In fact, I was actually thinking about a Nevada deployment potentially. We did that in 2016. While we still lost Nevada, it put a dent in that electorate. Maybe even perhaps Mr. McLaren will be coming to Arizona and we can have a good time there. But we're going to go where the party needs us to win those elections. So I would say my external policy primarily has to do with two things. For one, holding the CRNC accountable so we can make sure to continue to receive their resources and appropriate responsibly for the future. And secondly, it's going to be in promoting activism, promoting politics, promoting deployments, promoting precinct walks, working where Republicans are needed. So I will be working with states as necessary there.
Matt Russell is wondering, what's so wrong about being a moderate Republican? Why wouldn't we want to target moderate voters?
Absolutely nothing. That's a simple answer to that. There's nothing wrong with being a moderate Republican. In fact, in a lot of ways, I would consider myself a moderate, right? I'm not so far right-wing that I'm advocating abolishing the IRS, that I want this anarchist, proprietarian state. While it looks great on paper, it never works in real life. And I think moderates have a real sense of practicality to them, and I appreciate that. I appreciate a lot of the moderate politicians. But at the same time, we cannot allow them to take over our virtues, our values. So when it comes to the platform, we're always going to favor liberty, and we're not going to favor policies just because they're politically expedient. I think where I differentiate with moderates, to be honest, is a lot of moderates want us to compromise policy they themselves agree on for political expediency, to win more voters. I'm not here to win voters by their preconceived notions. I'm here to change preconceived notions. And by changing those preconceived notions, we can create real, lasting change. By simply pandering to the status quo, by simply giving in to Democrats, becoming Democrat lights, we might as well become Democrats and try to internally change their policy than trying to promote the Republican Party. I am here to protect and promote the Republican Party as it is, and our survival cannot happen without a virtuous exchange of ideas.
A few people are starting to change the topic a little bit. They're starting to wonder what CCR's policy would be in regards to the CRNC.
So specifically talking about the CRNC, number one, financial transparency. So I just wanted to read a few numbers, how ridiculous some of the CRNC was on reporting measures. I already read earlier on what their actual debt is based on IRS documents, but I wanted to read some of the specific highlights of my report, which any of you can find online. You can find the proof to this, how ridiculous some of this was. So even procedural transparency. We see, for instance, all attempts to amend the agenda to allow California's ideas to be discussed. None of it got through. Chandler wouldn't even allow it. They violated our right to have a transparent meeting. So they moved into executive session. They allowed no filming during the entire meeting so that they could cover up what was happening. Chandler, in fact, once I started grilling him on the budget, only allowed one question per delegate. And then on top of that, they passed not only the entire budget, so they did the entire vote, they passed the comp controller's report, and they began discussion on a resolution to have the executive committee approve the minutes while I was using the restroom because I'd been talking for 3 hours on stage, and they did all that in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's an attempt to fraud the state of California, and that's what ended up actually happening. Here's a couple more numbers that I viewed as extremely alarming. You know, CRNC staff expenditures. We spent over $210,000 in staff expenditures, but because the budget isn't concise in appropriations, it doesn't directly only list the chairs and only list the executive directors. So I'll read you some when I grilled him, and I finally got this information, thank God, on what he's being paid. So Chandler Thornton, CRNC chair, earns $90,000 a year, plus his expenses. So he's probably making what an entry lawyer makes. Ted Dooley, who's the executive director, makes $95,000. And then on top of that, they're appropriating $120,000 to some random research firm, which we don't know, they won't disclose the name of it, for activism ideas. And I'm telling you this, if the CRNC wants to appropriate money for activism ideas and just wants a lengthy report on it, they give CCR $5,000 and will create the biggest report they've ever seen. The fact they need to go to a research firm and pay them $120,000 to write them policy is absolutely ridiculous. And I understand having data-driven policies. The problem these days is not collecting data. That's just wrong. There's so much data online. You can do a meta-analysis on data, which in my opinion will provide you the most accurate model of what is the actual criteria of voters. It's not about that. It's just about going about writing the report. It takes time. It's going to be lengthy. But they shouldn't be paying off some contractor $120,000 to do it. And in fact, at the meeting, I made a motion to have it go through a bidding process so we can get a more competitive price because they didn't want to listen to me complaining about it was too expensive. And that on face was denied, unfortunately. But some of the ridiculous expenditures here are just absolutely convoluted. They didn't allow us to make certain motions. Other states criticized us. One person went up there and said, well, I only have 1 or 2 chapters. We don't even know about one of them, but at least we don't complain. And I reminded them, it is your solemn duty to complain. I am actually happy there are people right now on my live stream complaining. Because if you're not complaining in an appropriate form, then we're never going to be able to address the real issues. And I'm absolutely in favor of free speech. I believe sometimes we should have appropriate behavior in appropriate places, right? I shouldn't barge into somebody's dinner at 9 p.m. at night, like they did with Ted Cruz, and interrupt them. But I do believe in an appropriate public forum context that we should be willing to have a free exchange of ideas unhampered by political correctness. Unfortunately, many in the CRNC don't believe this. But as California, we have, as I stated before, a very large number of chapters, probably going to have the largest number of delegates by far, probably represent half the states, to be honest. We're going to be able to make impactful change at convention if we just sway a couple states. So I plan to work with the states, I plan to sit down with them, and to create a cohesive policy.
So here's a great question. It's a follow-up CRNC question from Christopher Ryan Casillas. Due to the issues coming from CRNC, some chapters have had issues receiving chapter boxes from the CRNC. If you manage to increase CCR funds, can the state organization attempt to give out its own CCR chapter boxes?
Yes. In fact, not only am I planning to appropriate more money to regions individually, I plan, once we write out the full budget, it's quite a lengthy process, to appropriate more money specifically to chapter resources. And we already kind of did that at the BOD. I want to expand that policy to go towards more chapter materials. But we have to recognize that gradually, as the CRNC falls into insolvency, that we need new policies. So I'm going to be, as the CRNC backs down slowly, passing more policies to allow us to advocate on a reasonable and appropriate level. And that involves more chapter boxes. Plan to distribute more money. I plan to have a form on the website where you can apply for a chapter box. Of course, this has to be tampered by our budget, but I plan to do all of this, and at the end of the day, we have to do that through reasonable, responsible financial policy that I listed just before. So to put simply, yes, we're going to increase chapter box appropriations. We're actually, to put it proportionally, I plan to increase chapter box appropriations 100%. Because those are the most important things. Most CRs don't care what we post online. They don't care about a lot of the specific nuanced state issues, but they care about their wallets. They care about their chapter boxes. You know, I hate to cite the Democrats, but Bill Clinton had the best quote in the 1990s that eventually won him the presidency and beat Bush out. It's the economy, stupid. And that's what this election is about. Let's move on to the next question.
All right, this next question is a social issue question. And this is a man named Jose Espinoza. He says that he is a Republican that is very socially conservative.
Okay.
And he identifies with the pro-life movement.
Okay.
And he wants to know how exactly you and CCR would be able to appeal to those who are pro-life and be able to act on pro-life sentiments.
Yeah. So that's a good question. The platform is already explicitly pro-life, so I guess that's one way. I don't want to leave out people who have other opinions on that. But what it actually is saying is we're going to attack institutions that support abortion and advocate replace them with responsible institutions. More specifically, ones that are not taxpayer funded. So my advocacy is pro-liberty always. I want to defund Planned Parenthood. I think that should be a centerpiece of our rhetoric. I want to defund organizations that are irresponsibly, incentivizing unethical sexual behavior. We have at UCI Sex Positivity Week, right? It's state-funded. It's literally state-funded degeneracy. And the problem behind all of this is that it incentivizes us to have irresponsible relationships. The left is literally trying to deconstruct the family unit, the nuclear family. And that's something important because without those institutions, without monogamy to begin with, we're not going to be able to pass conservative policies. I think that's an important prerequisite. Now, I believe people on their own time in their separate private bedroom lives can do whatever they want, but you should not be expending taxpayer dollars on funding that decadency. Next question.
All right. Well, at this point, we've pretty much exhausted all questions, so we should have a final question here. And the question is going to be, what do you want the audience and the viewers tonight and the people of CCR to take from this live stream, and what do you want them to remember from this?
So first most, I want people of CCR to recognize that I'm always open. I'm an open door chair. And I hope that this fireside chat shows I'm not going to back down from any question. You have a problem, you voice it. I hope Mr. Frusiaki's helping me today was able to, give me all the questions that were, important to my constituencies. But if he didn't, then A, either ask it next time, or B, DM me, contact me, text me. I'm responsive to almost all of you. As long as you are not just shouting profanities at me, I assure you I will respond to you in a reasonable time. That's the first thing, transparency. The second thing, virtuous advocacy. We are going to lead by virtue. We are going to have values that are explicit on our platform. We're going to help people that are good, that are promoting goodness, as Dennis Prager put it. And we're going to be supporting those who are running for office. We're going to have experienced leadership. And we're going to lead in a way that champions our values. It champions conservatism. And this goes back to an entire section, actually the biggest section of my policy. That section is changing the Overton window. I want constituents to take out of this, we're going to provide a coherent way for them to go about advocating conservative policy, pro-liberty, pro-freedom policy that can help them live effective lives as they so wish. Because that's what this is about. This is about being anti-coercive. This is about changing the discourse. And we're never going to do that without a way to change the Overton window, without a way to change the acceptableness coming from our institutions. Institutions are the ones to provide the fuel that will light the fire of a new state, of a new college Republicans, of a bright new future, one in which we can champion things we actually believe to protect future generations. I care about college Republicans not just from this nuanced academic perspective, but from a philosophical one. It is our duty as citizens to champion our values, to champion our country. And finally, I think this is the most important one. I want us to approach this from a deeply solemn, practical perspective. I recognize that none of what I said is feasible without the resources. I recognize that none of what I said is feasible without the promotion, without the support, without people in power giving us the okay. We can be like the average student government election, say, oh, we're going to give free ice cream out to everyone. Oh, we're going to give free lunches. No more homework, or things like that. But they're never going to happen. Don't trust anyone who doesn't have a mechanism to ensure solvency, because they're always lying to you. I'm here to promote not only the virtues I outlined, but practicality, but a way to do this. And that's what my slate brings. It brings experience. It brings people who know what they're doing. People who are willing to be loyal, people who are willing to advocate on behalf of their constituents, no matter the fire they get. We have specific people who have already joined our slate that have set up great ways for college Republicans to go about and promote conservatism. But honestly, at the end of the day, none of what I said before will happen without these people. None of what I said before will happen without the conceptualization of the ideas to make it happen. Without codifying things, without creating institutions to implement them, nothing will change. We'll go back to the days where the state organization was non-existent. So unless you're for just blanket dismantling everything that's been built, you're going to vote our way. You're going to vote our way because we're not only the virtuous slate, we're the practical slate. We're the ones championing your values, championing your country, championing us as people, as individuals, as institutions, as values, as ideas, and as college students. I'm here to represent you. I'm here to champion CCR. Thank you all so much. Have a great night, and Merry Christmas.